The first thing my sister did when she spotted me across the room was laugh. Not a surprised laugh. Not the kind that slips out when you see someone you weren't expecting. It was the kind of laugh that's designed to be heard, sharp and performative. Loud enough that the two couples standing nearest to her turned to look. She leaned toward her husband and said something I couldn't fully hear, but I caught enough. Something about me having no business being there. Something about the dress I was wearing. My brother-in-law grinned. I was standing near the entrance of the Whitmore Club, holding a glass of water I'd been given by a staff member who had assumed I was waiting for someone. The annual Winter Founders Dinner was in full swing around me. White tablecloths, candlelight, a string quartet tucked into the far corner playing something classical that no one was actually listening to. The kind of event where the napkins cost more per piece than most people spend on lunch. My sister was there because of my brother. He had invited her and her husband as his +2. He'd worked his way into the orbit of this crowd over the past several years, not because he belonged to it, but because he was relentless about being seen near people who did. Tonight was exactly the kind of evening he lived for. They had no idea why I was there. My brother saw me a moment later. His expression shifted in a way I recognized from childhood. Not anger exactly. More like the particular irritation of someone whose carefully arranged scene had developed an unwanted element. He crossed toward me with his shoulders already stiffening. "How did you even get in?" he asked. He said it quietly. Not because he was being considerate, but because he didn't want to cause a scene before he understood the situation. "I was invited," I said. He looked me over the way he always had, the way that started at my shoes and ended somewhere around my hairline, cataloguing every detail that didn't measure up. "By who?" His wife appeared at his elbow. She touched his arm without looking at me. That particular move, the one that says I'm not going to dignify this with eye contact while still making sure to be present for whatever came next. I didn't answer. I took a sip of my water. That was the part none of them had ever been able to handle. My silence. They expected me to explain myself, to justify my presence, to provide documentation for my own existence. When I didn't, it made them uncomfortable in a way they couldn't quite locate. My sister drifted closer. "Look, I don't know what you were thinking showing up here," she said, her voice dropping into that particular register she used when she wanted to sound like she was doing me a favor. "This is a members-only event. These people have seats on corporate boards. You can't just walk in because you feel like it." She let her gaze move across my dress. It was a simple black shift, well-fitted, no labels visible. Nothing they could point to and say, "See, she doesn't belong." That bothered her more than the alternative would have. My mother was seated at a table toward the center of the room. I saw her notice me, and I watched her make the calculation. She reached for her wine glass and turned slightly toward the woman beside her, angling her shoulder just enough to pretend she hadn't seen me come in. I knew that angle. I had grown up measuring it. I didn't move to greet her. I stayed where I was. Here is what my family had decided about me, somewhere around the time I was 17, that I was the one who didn't quite work. My brother was the businessman, the one who understood how the world actually functioned, who had always known the right people and played the right games. My sister was the social one, the one who made things look easy, who married well and had the kind of life that photographed nicely. And I was the third option, the one who had gone quiet in my 20s, disappeared into work that no one could easily explain at dinner parties, and who had never shown up at the right events or returned the right calls. For years they had filled in the silence with whatever story made the most sense to them. I had heard versions of it secondhand through relatives who still spoke to me, that I was struggling. Probably that whatever I was doing with my time hadn't amounted to much, that I was, as my brother once told my aunt, still figuring things out. He'd said it with a tone of pity that he hadn't bothered to disguise. They had never once asked me directly what I did. I think it was because they didn't actually want to know. Knowing would have required updating the story, and the story was comfortable. It kept me small, kept me at a distance, kept me in the role they'd assigned me before any of us were old enough to have chosen anything deliberately. So there I stood at the entrance of the Whitmore Club, and my family moved through the room like I was a smudge on an otherwise keen window. My brother leaned in one more time. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said. "I don't know how you got in, but this isn't the place." "You should go talk to your people," I said. "I'm fine here." He stared at me for a moment. Then he glanced around the room, calculating, always calculating, and walked away. The event manager found me about 15 minutes later. She was a woman in her early 40s, efficient-looking, with a tablet in her hand and the particular expression of someone who had been briefed on a situation and was now required to address it professionally. She introduced herself and asked if she could help me. "I've received a report," she said, "that there may be some confusion about your invitation status this evening." "There's no confusion on my end," I said. She typed something into her tablet. "I'm not seeing your name on the guest registry for tonight's event. Could I ask who you're here with?" "I'm not here with anyone." She nodded slowly, the way people do when they're trying to process something that doesn't quite fit the form they're completing. "This is a private members' dinner," she said. "Attendance is restricted to current Whitmore Club members and their registered guests. Do you have a membership?" "I do," I said. She typed again, paused, tried a different search. "I'm sorry, I'm not finding. Try Sutton," I said. "Leigh Sutton." She typed, stopped. The change in her expression was small but definite. Not alarm, more like recalibration. The kind that happens when the ground shifts slightly beneath a well-rehearsed process. "Miss Sutton," she said. Her voice had changed. Just enough. "That's me," I said. She lowered the tablet by about 2 inches. Her eyes moved to the room behind her briefly, then back to me. Of course, I apologize for the interruption." "It's fine," I said. "No real interruption." She excused herself. I watched her walk back toward the main floor with the careful posture of someone who was going to have a very specific conversation in the next few minutes. I took another sip of water. Across the room, I could see my brother laughing at something someone had said. He was in his element, angled toward a man in a dark suit, performing the version of himself that he had spent 30 years perfecting. My sister was beside her husband, working the adjacent circle with practiced ease. My mother had her back almost fully to the area near the entrance. None of them were watching me. That was about to change. The director of the club found me 3 minutes later. He was a man in his mid-60s named Mr. Drake Fenwick, which I knew because we had met 4 times before, most recently at a private dinner in October where we discussed the renovation proposal for the East Wing. He was, in the way of people who run exclusive institutions, extraordinarily composed. He moved through crowds the way water finds the easiest path, without appearing to try. He came directly to me. "Miss Sutton." He extended his hand and I shook it. "I want to apologize personally for any confusion this evening. We have a new events coordinator who wasn't fully briefed on our primary members." He said it without any drama. Just a clean, professional acknowledgement. "Thank you, Mr. Fenwick," I said. Honestly, no apology needed. He said a few more things, offered me a seat at his table, mentioned that the chef had prepared something he thought I would appreciate, asked how the renovations were progressing and my property across town. I answered. We spoke for about 4 minutes, comfortably, with the ease of 2 people who have met in professional contexts enough times to have dispensed with formality. I was aware the entire time that my brother had stopped laughing. I didn't look at him, not because I was performing anything, but because Mr. Fenwick was actually interesting to talk to, and the conversation happening across the room wasn't one I needed to observe in real time. I had waited 12 years for something like this moment. I could afford 4 minutes of genuine conversation. When Mr. Fenwick excused himself, I turned toward the room. My brother was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not the irritation I was used to. Something more like the face of a person who has just noticed that the floor of a room they thought they understood has a trapdoor in it. My sister had stopped talking mid-sentence to whoever she had been talking to. My mother had turned around. I walked to a small table near the window and sat down. A server appeared almost immediately, addressed me by name and asked what I'd like. I ordered a glass of Bordeaux and watched the room recalibrate. My brother came to me about 20 minutes later. He sat down in the chair across from me without being invited, which was very much how he had operated our entire lives. "How do you know Fenwick?" he asked. "He runs the club," I said. "I know who he is." "How do you know him?" I took a sip of my wine. "I'm a member here," I said. "A primary member. Have been for about 4 years. He stared at me. "Primary members," I said, "have voting rights on club governance, board seat auctions, that sort of thing." He was very still. "You've been... What do you do?" he asked. And the particular quality of the question, the fact that he was actually asking for what I believed was the first time in our adult lives, told me everything about what the last 20 minutes had cost him. "Real estate investment," I said. "Primarily commercial. We have 9 properties in 4 states. I am also, which is relevant to tonight's event, a founding underwriter for the Whitmore Preservation Fund, which is one of the reasons Mr. Fenwick knows my name." He sat with that for a moment. "You never said anything," he said. "You never asked." He opened his mouth, closed it. He was looking for the version of this conversation where he came out ahead, and he was realizing one exit at a time, that the doors were sealed. My sister arrived then. She pulled out a 3rd chair without being invited and sat down, glancing between us. "What's going on?" she asked. "We're talking," I said. "About what?" "About how 12 years went by without any of you asking me a single question about my life." The silence that followed was the kind that isn't about absence of sound. The string quartet was still playing. There were still conversations happening across the room. Silverware clinking, a woman laughing somewhere near the bar. The silence was in the 3 of us, the particular stillness of people who have been in the same dynamic for so long that something shifting in it is physically disorienting. My sister said, "That's not fair. We called." "You called to tell me things," I said. "That's different." My brother set his jaw. My mother found us a few minutes later. She approached the table slowly, with the deliberate pace of someone who has decided to be dignified about a situation she doesn't fully understand yet. She sat down. She looked at me for a long moment. Actually looked at me, and I realized that this was one of the few times in my adult life I could recall her doing that. Just looking, without the layer of management over it, without calculating what she needed me to be. "Leigh," she said. "Hi, Mum," I said. She didn't know what to say next. I think she had been planning to use the warmth of her voice as a tool, the way she usually did, to redirect things towards something more comfortable. But something about the evening had stripped the tools away. "We didn't know," my brother said finally. "I know you didn't," I said. "You didn't know because you decided 12 years ago that there was nothing worth knowing. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject. Every holiday I came home and told you I was doing well. You told me I looked tired. Every time I didn't engage with the family drama, you called it detachment." I set my wine glass down. "You built a story about me that was easier than paying attention, and you believed it so completely that you walked into my club tonight and told me to leave." My sister pressed her lips together. "We didn't know it was your club." "It isn't exclusively my club," I said. "I'm a member. I'm also a financial supporter. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is that you told me to leave without asking a single question first. That's what I want you to think about." No one said anything. I finished my wine. I was not angry in the way I had expected to be, in all the times I had run this scenario in my mind over the years. The anger had burned down a long time ago. What was left was something closer to clarity, the clean, unambiguous recognition that these were people I had once desperately needed, and that the need had not been mutual. "I'm going to go find Mr. Fenwick," I said. "I have some things to discuss with him about the spring program." I stood up. My mother reached out and touched my arm. "Can we talk properly? Can we?" She paused. "I didn't know, Leigh. I really didn't." "I know, Mum," I said. "That's the part I've been trying to tell you." I walked back into the room. The rest of the evening moved the way evenings like that do when the initial drama has settled and everyone is quietly recalibrating. The quartet played. Dinner was served. Mr. Fenwick made his remarks. Awards were presented to 3 members who had contributed to the Preservation Fund. My name was mentioned twice, once in the programme and once by the chairman of the Foundation Board, who thanked me by name for my contribution to the East Wing renovation. My family sat at their assigned table. I watched my brother's face during the second mention of my name, from across the room, without being obvious about it. He had the expression of a person absorbing a significant recalculation, the kind that doesn't happen quickly. I didn't gloat. I genuinely didn't feel the urge to. I was past the place where their acknowledgement meant something I needed to collect. The event wound down the way these things do. Gradually, the quiet signal of coats being retrieved and final glasses being finished. I was near the door, saying goodnight to a woman I knew from a project in Raleigh, when my brother appeared at my elbow. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. "Next week. Just to talk. I'll check my schedule," I said. "Leigh, I'll check my schedule," I said. "Leigh, I'll check my schedule," I said again. "I'll have my assistant reach out to yours." He nodded. He looked older than he had at the beginning of the evening. Smaller, somehow. I shook the hand of the woman from Raleigh, said goodnight to Mr. Fenwick, and walked out to the car that was waiting at the curb. In the days that followed, I returned to work. There were contracts to review, a site visit in Columbus, a call with my partners about a property in Phoenix that we'd been watching for 2 quarters. The ordinary business of a life I had built from nothing, or more precisely, from a used laptop and a $4,000 loan I'd taken from my own savings at 24, which I had paid back to myself with interest before I turned 27. The industry I worked in was smaller than it looked from outside. It was the kind of world where everyone who mattered knew everyone else who mattered, and where a story, once attached to a name, tended to stay there. What happened at the Whitmore Club did not stay at the Whitmore Club. I heard about it through the usual channels. A colleague mentioning it over coffee, a board member referencing it obliquely in an email. My brother's name had come up in some circles in a way that hadn't helped him. The version people were telling was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was embarrassing. The story of a man who had walked into a club where his own sisters sat on the foundation board and told her to leave. That was the story. Small, specific, and the kind of thing that clung. His dinner with the Hargrove Group, a real estate development firm he had been courting for 2 years, was quietly postponed, twice. Then not rescheduled. I didn't do anything to cause that. I simply existed in the same professional world they had not known I inhabited. My sister's situation was different. She had built her identity around social currency, the right invitations, the right photographs, the right associations. Some of those associations began conducting their own private recalculations. The woman she co-chaired a charity committee with asked her to step back from a public-facing role, citing a need to refresh the committee's profile. The explanation was polite and impersonal and clearly about something else entirely. I heard she took it hard. My mother called me 4 times in the 3 weeks after the dinner. I answered twice. The first time, she wanted to explain, to go back through the history of our family and locate where things had gone sideways, as if it were a navigational error that could be corrected by finding the right exit. I listened for a while and then told her I needed to go. The second time, she said something that I didn't expect. She said, "I remember when you moved out. I remember packing the last box into your car. And I remember thinking, this will be fine. She'll be back soon. She'll figure out but she needs us. And then you just didn't. And I think for a long time I told myself that was your fault, that you had chosen to stay away. But I was here. I was the one who could have called." I didn't say anything for a moment. "I know you were, Mom," I said. She cried a little then. Not the performance crying I had learned to recognize from childhood, the calculated variety deployed to redirect a conversation. This was something quieter and more specific, the kind that doesn't have an audience. "I don't know if we can fix it," she said. "I don't know either," I said. "I'm not sure fix is the right word. There isn't a broken version of something we had. There's just what we actually were and what we could choose to be now. and those are different questions. She said she wanted to try. I told her I'd think about it. My brother sent a formal request through his assistant 3 weeks after the dinner. He was asking if I would be willing to provide a character reference for his application to a professional trade organisation. The organisation, which I happened to know, was one where 3 of my partners had active memberships and significant influence. I read the email twice. Then I forwarded it to my own assistant and asked her to draft a polite decline on the grounds that I didn't feel I knew his recent professional work well enough to speak to it accurately. That was true. I hadn't known his professional work at all. He had never told me about it for the same reason I had never told him about mine. We had existed in adjacent rooms of the same family and never once looked through the doorway. The decline was not cruelty. It was accuracy. My sister reached out in the spring, which surprised me more than either of the others had. She sent a text, brief, direct, less calculated than I expected from her. I've been thinking about the Whitmore thing a lot. I don't think you owe me anything. I just wanted to say that I know I was unkind that night, and probably other nights. I'm sorry for that. I sat with the text for 2 days before I replied. Thank you for saying it, I wrote. I appreciate it more than you might think. We are not close, my sister and I. I don't know if we will be, but something in that exchange felt more honest than almost anything that had passed between us in the previous decade, and I held on to that. What I understand now, in the months since, is this: the version of me that my family invented, the struggling one, the quiet one, the one who had never quite worked out. That version was never about me. It was about what I represented to them. The narrative that kept my brother secure in his position, that kept my sister comfortable in hers, that kept my mother from having to ask herself harder questions about what she had given and what she had withheld. I had been a story they told, and when the story turned out to be wrong, what fell apart was not our relationship, because what we had was never quite a relationship. What fell apart was the shared fiction we had all, in our own ways, agreed to maintain. I hadn't agreed to maintain it anymore. That was the only thing I had done. There is a property in Savannah I've been working on for the past several months, a historic building near the waterfront that I've been working to acquire for conversion to mixed-use commercial space. It requires patience, the kind of work that doesn't announce itself, the kind that builds quietly and without approval until one day you look up and what you've made is real and solid and entirely yours. I think about that sometimes in relation to the rest of it. My family is still out there, living the lives they've built. My brother is navigating a professional landscape that has become more complicated. My sister is finding her way through a social world that has shifted in ways she didn't anticipate. My mother calls occasionally. We talk, briefly, carefully, with the particular attention of people who are learning how to be honest with each other for what might be the first time. My father has not reached out. I don't expect him to. Some patterns hold. But I am not waiting for any of them anymore. I stopped waiting somewhere around the time I realized that the life I had built, the one they never asked about, the one they filled with their own assumptions, was the most real thing about me. It did not require their acknowledgement to be true. The Whitmore Club holds its spring dinner in April. I've already confirmed my attendance. I'll be there in the same simple black dress. No labels, no performance. Just myself standing exactly where I am supposed to be, in a room that I helped build. That is enough. It has always been enough. I just didn't know it until the moment they tried to take it from me, and couldn't. There's something I've thought about a lot since that night at the Whitmore Club. Not the look on my brother's face when Mr. Fenwick shook my hand. Not the moment my sister stopped mid-sentence. Not even my mother turning around after years of turning away. What I keep coming back to is something quieter than all of that. The fact that I almost didn't go. I had received the invitation 6 weeks earlier. A formal notice from the club, as I always did. And for about 4 days I seriously considered declining. Not because I was afraid, but because I had spent so many years building a life that didn't require my family's presence in it, and walking into a room where they might be felt like reopening something I had carefully and deliberately closed. I went anyway, not to prove anything, just because it was my club and I had work to do there, and I had long since stopped organising my decisions around what my family might or might not do in any given room. That choice, Showing up as myself, without announcement or explanation, is the thing that made everything else possible. Not revenge, not planning, just presence. I think about what it actually took to get to that room, not the networking or the investments or the board relationships, though those mattered. I mean what it took internally. The years of working 2 jobs in my mid-20s, while my brother got handed his first client list by a family friend. The years of being told, in ways both direct and subtle, that I was the version of the family that hadn't quite worked out. The years of silence, not the cold silence of defeat, but the quiet, deliberate silence of someone who had decided to build rather than argue. That kind of silence takes something. It takes a willingness to be misunderstood for a long time without letting the misunderstanding become your own belief about yourself. My family had a story about me. For a while when I was younger, I worried they might be right, that the confidence I felt about my work was something I had invented to survive, not something real. That I would eventually be found out. What I learned, slowly, over years, not in a single moment, is that the only way to find out if you're capable of something is to do it. To keep doing it when no one is watching, to build when no one believes there's anything worth building. The Whitmore Club didn't make me real. It just made it harder for the people who had written me off to pretend otherwise. What happened to my brother and my sister and the social circles they'd built? That wasn't something I did to them. It was the natural weight of their own choices, finally becoming visible. Every time my brother laughed at someone below him in his estimation, he was writing a record. Every time my sister calculated the social cost of acknowledging me, she was choosing a version of the world that was smaller than the real one. Those choices accumulated. The Whitmore evening just happened to be the moment the ledger was read aloud. I don't think this means the world is just in any simple or automatic way. I know it isn't. I know people work hard and build real things and still get overlooked. I know silence is sometimes survival and sometimes defeat, and sometimes it's very hard to tell the difference from inside it. What I know from my own life is that when I put my energy into the work instead of into managing other people's perceptions of me, the work became something they couldn't ignore forever. Not because the world rewards virtue, but because real things built steadily over time tend to become undeniable. Leigh Sutton walked into that room carrying 12 years of work that no one in her family had ever asked to see. She walked out, the same person she had been walking in. The only thing that changed was what they knew. That's enough. That has always been enough.